All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit Podcast. Are you ready?
Hi.
You gotta match the energy, brother. All right. So we're just gonna get into it. We're gonna do a BuzzFeed quiz. It's called Can We Guess Your Favorite Season based on this pancake buffet. I'm not a big pancake girly. I can't.
Did it start for you?
Yeah. Did it not start for everyone else? It's just you. Oh, there you
Okay,
go.
now it's going. Okay.
Your phone's just lagging.
It really is. You have no idea. It's bad.
All right. I'm not a big pancake girly. Of all the breakfast things, I don't know.
Well, we're about to find out.
Well, the only options are pancakes. So pick a type of pancake. Crepes? Crepes? Crepes are not pancakes.
Exactly. I feel like they're being very loose with the word pancake right now.
So then have a waffle in here. Crepes, flapjacks, regular, souffle. What's the difference between flapjacks and regular
I feel like they
pancakes?
both are the exact same thing because they look the same in the picture, except the regular ones look burnt.
They're darker for sure.
Like, yeah, those look burnt.
I'm gonna do flapjacks.
I'm going souffle.
What'd you pick? Farah did crepes. I like crepes, but I feel like sometimes, like with the fillings and stuff, they just tend to like fall apart. Like they get like
You're
Like,
getting bad crepes then. They
maybe.
shouldn't fall apart.
no, not like disintegrate, but like they're just too thin sometimes for me. And I know that's the lure of like that's
No,
the
I
point
feel
of
like
a
you're getting
crepe.
bad crepes. Like it shouldn't
Maybe.
like break. I've never had a crepe that
Well-
like with the filling. Like I know, like
Like filling and ice cream and like not like breakfast crepes, like dessert crepes.
yeah, I've had dessert crepes. I've had like all kind like savory and sweet crepes. I've never had a problem.
Because I've had it. Well, I'm also just a slow eater, so like when the ice cream melts and then it gets like melty.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah.
That's not the crepe's fault.
I never said it was. Pick a type of batter: buttermilk, chocolate, lemon, strawberry. Buttermilk. Chocolate pancakes. I do chocolate chip pancakes.
I guess
I don't.
buttermilk.
I've never had lemon or strawberry pancakes.
I mean, I could understand maybe putting lemon, like
Zest.
yeah, like a lemon flavoring in it, but
Mm.
not a lemon
Interesting.
batter.
Pick a topping. No topping. Berries, sprinkles, marshmallows. Sprinkles on everything. I love sprinkles.
How do you do a thing about pancakes and you don't have syrup as a topping?
I don't know.
Right, sprinkles it is.
Pick another topping. Oh, the options. I set the options, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pick another topping. No topping. Chocolate chips. Those do not look like chocolate chips. Those look like peanut butter and chocolate chips. Sliced fruit, powdered sugar. Chocolate chips.
Yeah, chocolate chips.
Pick another topping. No topping. Coconut flakes, nuts, or whipped cream. Whipped cream. I feel like I'm just
Whipped
making
cream?
Buddy the Elves like pasta.
Mm-hmm.
Pick a syrup. No sauce. Chocolate syrup, maple syrup, strawberry syrup, maple classic.
I mean, after everything I just put on, I'm gonna do chocolate syrup.
Okay.
That's whoa. Okay,
What?
I clicked the wrong thing and got taken out of the quiz.
Everyone done? Okay. We got 3 summers and an autumn. Me, Kevin, and Asha are summer. Farah is autumn. And it says summer. You're among the few that can actually stand the heat. Beach days make the hot sun totally worth it for you. I disagree.
I concur with your disagreement.
Asha, how do you feel about that?
I like fall or
Same.
spring.
Farah got autumn. You're an adventure person who takes advantage of fall foliage and the beautiful landscapes. You're always in the mood for a spooky season, warm cup of cider, and super trendy fall fashion. That's me. Not that it's not you, Farah. I'm not saying it's not you.
Not.
Oh, okay. I feel like you're summer. You're summer and we're fall. This is backwards.
And I absolutely hate fall because of my allergies.
That's
so-
true.
And spring.
They got it backwards. Are you summer or fall?
Probably more
You're
fall.
fall.
Yeah. I just
Give him
spent
any
a
reason
whole
to wear a
weekend
flannel.
in the sun and I was miserable. Like
Anyway,
Okay, so we're continuing on Joseph. Um,
who'da thunk?
Not me. Um, were you a good or bad test taker in school?
Oh, I'm not good at test taking.
How do you feel when you have a huge test for school, like midterms,
Anxious.
finals? Okay. Um,
I just second guess everything that I know, and it's like it's not that I don't know it. It's just I'm a bad test taker sometimes.
so one of the things.
Unless it's a written exam, then I'm good. But if it's like multiple choice,
Oh, I was about to say like what other.
like
How many
short
like
answer, long
okay.
answer, I'm good at those. But A,
So
B, and
most of
C,
the tests that you had to take in school, then you were anxious then for.
absolutely.
Okay.
Except for those, when you're in elementary school and you have like that sheet of like math stuff, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna pull up a picture.
Right. So we're talking today about, and I think we kind of started talking about it a little bit toward the end of our last episode, right? About perseverance and faithfulness, right? Um, as far as story wise in the life of Joseph, we kind of dealt more with him being a slave in Potiphar's house, and we're gonna move to him now getting thrown into prison, that like transition part there, right? But the reason I asked about the test is a lot of times it feels as though our relationship with God is multiple tests. It's just
Okay.
test after test, right? Trial after trial. I think that's the more like churchy way of putting it, trial after trial. And I think for a lot of us, these tests, these trials, these situations, these reveal a lot about our character. Um, but it also it reveals a lot about our character because of the fact, and I guess I alluded to this in the last episode, what happens when you finish a test, um, but there only seems to be more trouble when that test is done, right?
Okay.
And I think for a lot of us, we often end up in asking ourselves this question of, is it really worth following God when doing so makes our circumstances seem more difficult, right? Um, so if we look at Genesis 39, that's not Genesis. And if I have it right, um, so you read up to verse 6.
Yes.
The end of verse 6 says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. Right?
Yeah, he was.
And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How then can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her, one day when he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants were inside, she caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and then ran out of the house. Right? Um, and then she screams for help and he gets arrested. Right? One thing that's really interesting about this is the fact that Joseph's cloak always seems to get him in trouble because it's the rainbow cloak or the the coat of many colors that his dad gives him, gets him in trouble with his brothers, and that's what they use as evidence to convince um, Jacob that he's dead. And now it's because they take it from him, they put the animal blood on it and give it to.
So how did he have it back? Oh, it's just
No, this is
his
different.
cloak in
Just
general.
yeah, his
Okay, I thought you
yeah,
were saying
just
the
yeah, no,
same
no,
cloak.
just a cloak in general. Yeah, it's just really interesting that you know like just wear like a regular t-shirt, my guy. But so um yeah, so he ends up getting thrown in jail, right? And I believe he's in jail for like another 10 years before he gets out of jail. Right? It's at least 10 years, right? So Joseph spends a lot of his life as a slave, as a prisoner, right? Um, with that in mind, right? Um, you spoke last episode about blooming where you're planted, right? Obviously, for Joseph, that process of blooming came through sort of these different tests, right? Of, as it says in Genesis 39, right? The It wasn't as though Potiphar's wife asked him one time. It says day after day, right? This was a repeated thing um that kept happening. And it looks, and for me, the implication is other people may have seen this happen. It's just the last time in which gets him thrown in jail, there's no servants around. So there's a very good chance other slaves may have heard something, just didn't speak up, right? Um, when you face test, right? What do you learn or discover about God during the test and then maybe after the test?
Well, I think you can learn different things based off of the different situations open your eyes to different things, right? Um, I think one constant, I guess, that you can learn from the test is that God is still with you through it. It may not feel as though He is because you're going through a difficult time sometimes, but just as Joseph was faithful and he maintained his relationship and his faith in God, and he was brought out of situations, or he was brought through situations, like you said in the last episode, God had never left him, despite his circumstances.
Yeah. I think God's tests reveal two things to us. It reveals who we are and it reveals who God is.
Mhm.
Right? And I think a lot of times when we are going through these tests, when we're going through these situations, most times, I mean, like as you said, right, when you're taking a test, you were typically anxious, right? Um, a lot of God's tests, His trials, are not like comfortable, right? Typically, they're difficult situations, but He allows us to walk through them to build our character and to make us more like Jesus, right? It's this process that we often refer to as kind of God refining us, right? There's a show, I forgot what channel it's on, but called Forge and Fire, right? It's a knife making competition show, right? Yeah. So okay, it's great that you've seen it because if I don't know how much like you really paid attention
I've seen
to
like bits and pieces.
okay, yeah. So if you watch it, right, they basically go through the entire process of making a knife every episode, right? They're making some type of bladed tool, right? Because sometimes it's not even like a weapon; it's like a chef's knife or whatever, right? Um, when you watch what they do, the process of turning this random piece of metal into a functional blade is quite amazing.
Yeah.
Right? There was one of them where they took like everyone, it looked like they just got like a rusted piece of metal and they had to turn it into like a functioning weapon in which then it gets tested for how sharp it is and how strong it is. And I think one of them they had to make a chef's knife. Um, you typically don't take a chef's knife and just bang it into a table, right? Like you use it to chop stuff, but it's relatively soft things that you're cutting into, right? Like
Not
even
always.
even if you're cutting into meat and stuff like that, like vegetables, they're typically not as hard as just chopping into like a piece of wood and
what if
things
it's
like
like
that.
things with bone?
But even then, like you're not supposed to use a chef's knife
Oh, yeah,
to like cut into like but then you get like a cleaver or something,
Yeah, that's what
right?
it's called.
So they'll take the chef's knife and they'll see how sharp it is, and then they'll have like a bone tied to a table, and they'll just start whacking the knife into the bone, and then see how well like it retained its sharpness, and then do another sharpness test. And it's insane because every time you watch a show, the guys are just like, they're so super nervous because they're like, no knife is really meant to do this, right? Like this is not what it's meant to do, right? And it's really interesting because you'll see knives like explode in this thing because like you're hitting into like bone, right? You're not supposed to do that, and it breaks. But even before they get to that, when you watch the process of them making a knife, they're taking this piece of metal, they have to clean it, right? Because if the metal has dirt or impurities on it, when you try to forge it into a knife, um, that those little dirt spots make the knife brittle and weak.
Mhm.
So they have to clean off all of that, right? Then they start to heat it up and start, either hammering it. Sometimes they have like a power tool, and you'll see even then when they start to heat up the iron or whatever it is, it starts to again build up impurities that they have to then clean off again. So it's this constant process of heating this metal, hitting it, and cleaning it off, right? Until it starts to resemble the shape of a knife. Then even when that's done, they have to harden the metal by basically rapidly cooling it, which can often also break the knife in and of itself, right? So there's all these different things that happen. And I think when we look at or think of the idea of that God is refining us, I think we have to understand that this was never meant to be a comfortable, easy process. It is uncomfortable, right? It is sometimes painful, right? It is hard to go through this process. Um, and I think for Joseph, you see that, right? When he is once again, right, kind of falsely imprisoned, right? Because he gets imprisoned before when his brothers throw him in that pit, right? So we see this happening to him all the time, right? Now, one of the other things with um, Joseph, right, is that the Bible includes in was it verse 6 that he is uh well built and handsome, right? And these are two things that lead to trouble with Potiphar's wife, right? But they're relatively out of his control, right? Um has there been a time when your gifts have been misunderstood?
I thought you were gonna ask me if there was a time where I was well built and handsome.
I'm not going there right now.
Where my gifts have been misunderstood, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Um I don't know if they've been misunderstood, but there have been times where they have been um like over I don't want to say like overlooked, but I can't find the word that I'm looking for. Um but there have been times where like I've said before, like I work with the kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been times where people think that working with the kids is not all that it is. Um, they've been undercalculated. Maybe that's kind of I don't know. I'm looking for a word.
I feel like you're looking for the word misunderstood.
It's
Because
not.
what you're describing is people
I mean,
misunderstand.
I suppose maybe it was misunderstood, but I feel like it was people have underestimated them.
Okay.
I guess maybe that's a better word for it.
Okay.
Where they have like I understand that you have this skill set and you do this, but I don't think it's that much,
Okay.
right?
How does that situation make you feel though?
It's never good to be it never feels good to be underestimated, right? To
Mhm.
feel as though you're not doing much,
Yeah.
especially when you know the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely been in situations where the gifts I had were misunderstood and sometimes often overlooked. and it's just never been a good. Like I've been in a ton of meetings where it's like, hey, we should do this, and then like 1 month later, they circle back and someone else says the exact same thing
Yeah.
I said, and it's like, okay, cool. Like we, like I've with some of the teams I work with, it's really like, hey, if we say it, it won't be taken seriously. So we have to wait for someone else to realize this is an issue
Mm.
and bring it up. And that was literally one of the things that happened today. And it was just funny because it was just like one of the guys was like, well, why didn't we say it? I was like, because if we said it, no one would have cared.
I think it's also frustrating when you're in a situation where they're looking like there's a problem. Everyone knows that there's a problem, and you're giving solutions, and your solutions are overlooked and underestimated. And then you come back like months later, and you're like, so why didn't this work?
I 100% agree with that. And I think you see some of that in the life of Joseph also, right? Yet he has this ability to kind of just hold on to his faith,
Mhm.
right? But I think when these situations happen, right, it it gives the devil the ability to tempt us to do things that go against the character I think God wants us to have, right?
Okay.
I think that often that feeling of dissatisfaction, of resentment, of bitterness can sometimes open the door for him to tempt us to do something. You know what? Maybe we should lash out. Maybe we should do whatever, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's important for us to note that temptation always draws us away from God, right? And it tells us that we need more, we aren't enough, we'll be happier away from God's plan, right? Um, how do you fight back against temptation?
Um, like in terms of like the frustration and the
In any
or
sense
in
of
general.
temptation, whether it's
I
what you
think
know, yeah.
I think first you have to recognize that you are being tempted, right? To acknowledge that this is something that I said that I've struggled with, and now all of a sudden, now that I'm in this vulnerable position of being frustrated, of being angry, of like looking for things, all of a sudden now it's coming back, right? So it's first you have to recognize that you are being tempted, um, and then if it's not within your ability to resist the temptation, right? Um, always take it to God, but also it's important to have someone physically around that can hold you accountable, right? So like to have a good friend, to have a leader, to have someone that you can speak to be like, hey, I'm going through this right now, and all of a sudden this is happening, and I need help. I need, like, hold me accountable. Can you check in on me? Like whatever it is.
Yeah, I think you answered like the next three questions I was gonna ask, but I think no, that really encapsulates I think how we as believers are meant to deal with temptation, right? The only thing I would add is that in addition to having those like what's it called accountability partners or and things like that,
Mhm.
I think we also need to be able to just remember who God is and remember that whatever this temptation is trying to however it's trying to move us away from God, understand that God is providing that, just not the way the temptation is. Right? Like typically if a temptation is trying to provide us some type of happiness or something like that, understand that God is probably giving us that same level of happiness in a better way, just the way He designed it.
So take it to God.
Yes. Um, so as going back to Joseph and Potiphar's wife, right? Um, anytime I think we talk about the story of Joseph, especially with Potiphar's wife, we get into this idea of Joseph's integrity,
Mhm.
right? How would you define integrity?
How would I define integrity? Um, I feel like to have integrity is, I don't know. Like I know what it like I know how to use the word and I know what it means in terms of context, but to give you like a formal definition, I don't know if I
So, what would be the context in which you would use integrity?
like in the way that you carry yourself or in the way that you like go about certain things. Like I can say that Joseph had integrity because he stuck to his guns, right? He stuck to his morals and he's like, how can I sin against God and my master by doing this, right?
Okay.
He knew what was right and wrong and he was very firm on where that line was. I looked it up. The
Okay.
quality of being honest and having and having strong moral principles or moral uprightness.
So, for integrity, we often associate integrity with morals,
Mhm.
right, and like ethics.
Yep.
And as you said, right, when talking about Joseph, we see he has this very strong moral compass, right, that is rooted in his faithfulness to God, right. His to say Joseph was a man of integrity is to say that Joseph knew who God was, knew God's word, and held fast to that no matter the situation, whether the other servants were there to see him interact with Potiphar's wife or they weren't, right? Joseph always acted that way, right? You can also talk about integrity when it comes to like the structure of something, like the strength of it, right? Like you can say that bridge has like the integrity of a bridge because it's like not falling apart when there's weight on it and things like that. Or you might say the integrity of something is compromised because maybe there's a crack in the foundation and things like that, right? So when I had looked up integrity, one of the other definitions that's the first one. I think the second one might be, let's see if, okay, this is not pulling it up, right? It's a state or quality of being complete or undivided, completeness, right? And I think when we talk about Joseph and we talk about integrity, that's really what we see, this idea of him just being completed in God's word, right? He knew that though he could have probably have gotten away with sleeping with Potiphar's wife, he knew it was wrong, right? And he was less concerned about what can he get away with and more with what is right. And I think when we talk about integrity, when we talk about this idea of having perseverance, that's what we're talking about, right? The ability to go and say, hey, yes, I can do this right now. No one is looking, but God will know.
It's like that notion of doing the right thing even though no one else is looking, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think that's exactly it. One of the other things though is that typically we view, actually I think almost always we view someone that is a person of integrity in high regard, right? I don't think there's ever been a situation in which a person of integrity was looked down upon for their integrity, right? But when we look at the life of Joseph, his integrity did not lead him to the praise of his peers or a reward from his boss. Instead, it gets him thrown in prison, right? And I think that's also something as believers we have to kind of learn to accept that, contrary to what we might expect, doing the right thing can sometimes make life more difficult for us, right? Do you believe that having integrity is always worth the cost?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Because like even though he was thrown in jail, he didn't stay there forever.
Yes.
Like it's I think it's also I think it has to do with your sense of morality, right? Which is also very subjective. Because if I'm choosing to do the right decision, to do the right thing, right? No, despite the fact that no one else is looking, right? And it gets me into trouble, I'll still know that I did the right thing. right? So it's like I think it leans more onto a personal level of where your morals lie. Cause like I can do something and it'll make me feel icky inside, but like it's what everyone else would have done. Or I could do something that no one else would have done, but it was the right thing to do. And it might be difficult, right? Like having those difficult conversations, like bringing up like something you don't like about someone, right? It's not a fun conversation to have, but in the end it might work out better. You I mean it could work out, you could lose that person, or like they'll take what you said into consideration, but in the end you had the conversation, you did the thing.
Yeah, I think one of the I know sometimes people talk about this idea of like when you make certain decisions, are you able to live with that decision?
Mm.
Right? And my issue with that is some people have such a distorted moral compass
Mm-hmm.
that you'd be surprised with what decisions they can live with, right? And when we look again at Joseph and we look at probably a ton of people in the Bible, um, right? Or Joseph being compared to David, right? Because when David is tempted to sleep with someone else, he does it,
Mm.
right? And then in trying to cover that up, he ends up murdering that woman's
Husband.
husband, right? And then, if I remember correctly, the child from their affair dies as well. I think that was part of the punishment for what happened,
Mhm.
right? A lot of bad things happen, right? Because of David's choice to give into temptation, right? Um, Yet, when you look at Joseph, a lot of bad things happen for him refusing to give into temptation, right? And I think it's an important parallel for us to understand as believers that we shouldn't be looking to follow God's word with the necessary expectation that good things are going to follow,
Mm.
right? Or that, I don't want to say that good thing, that we're going to be like blessed with X, Y, and Z because we did the right thing. Because I think when we go back to the conversation we had about prayer, that goes back to having those wrong views of God. Like he's a vending machine. Like if
Mhm.
I do the right thing, he's going to give me what I want,
Mhm.
right? That's not what the Bible really teaches, right? We're doing the right thing because it's the right thing. Full stop. That's it.
I think also in that first episode on the series, right, where we talked about, you were saying that if Joseph hadn't gone into certain situations, he never would have come out the way that he was, right? So although he was seemingly punished for having integrity, he had to be put in those certain places in order to get to where he was going to go.
Yeah. I also think just as you skip ahead to the end of or later in the story when Joseph is reunited with his brothers, right? I don't think Joseph, had he not maintained such a high level of integrity, I don't think he would have had the reunion with his family that he has at the end.
Mhm.
I think had Joseph been a petty person, when he had that power,
Mhm.
you would have seen him abuse that power, right? Instead, Joseph, as a man of integrity, um, uses, he doesn't really abuse his power. He instead uses this opportunity to reunite his family, right? And bring them into, at that time, I guess would have been a better place, right? Um, but as we were saying, right, we see is unfairly uh, Joseph unfairly suffers for the crimes he did not commit, right? Um, I think most of us would feel like God abandoned us in that situation, right? Yet in verse 21 of chapter 39, it says, The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Verse 22, so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. He was made responsible for all that was done there. Right? The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Right? At this point in the story, do you feel like it's clear that God is being kind?
I think so. Because he went from being a prisoner to being the person in charge of the prisoners. Right? So although he was in prison,
Mhm.
he could have been tortured. Right? He could have been at the will of the other prisoners. There's so many other things that could have happened there where it didn't. Right? So just like Daniel in the lion's den, God shut the mouth of the lions. I feel like it's very equivalent to what's happening here because of his faithfulness.
Okay. So if we look at James chapter 1 verses 2 to 4, it says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Right? A couple of things to note here. It doesn't say if you face trials, it says whenever. The implication there being that trials are not an optional thing for believers, right? Realistically, we can opt out of not going through with a trial, right? But as a believer, you are going to face trials, right? How hard or how easy is it, right, to consider trials, right, especially looking at the life of Joseph, joy? And not just any type of joy, pure joy.
How hard is it to experience joy in his circumstances?
Not in the circumstances, right? Verse 2 says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face
Yeah.
trials. So it's
So
not
in
even,
general.
yeah, like the fact that God is putting trials in front of you should be welcomed, right?
Mhm.
How does that make you feel? Is that something easy to do?
Oh, it's definitely not easy. It's definitely something that you have to learn and remind yourself of, because it's normal to not feel joyous in uncomfortable or like scary or like unfortunate circumstances, right? Like like you mentioned before, like in the last episode, right, where it's like a loved one is sick and they pass away. I'm not going to feel joyous in their death, but I might feel joyous in the fact that they're not suffering and they're with the Lord, right? But in the moment, I'm going to mourn for them. I think a lot of times it's not easy to feel joyous in those situations or in like unfortunate times. But again, it's one of those things where I think it's a different kind of joy, right? I think it's not joyous in that I'm physically happy and smiling, but it's a joy in that um I guess my faith in God is what gives me joy or peace in knowing that the situation is handled the way that it should have been handled.
Yeah, I think of it as um going to the gym, right? Um you may not want to go to the gym, you may not want to do that work to feel sore and all of that, yet you know by putting in that work, you're coming out of that situation, that experience better for it, right? Obviously, not just going to the gym one time, it takes, repetition or whatever, but because the full verse or verse 3 says, verse 2 says, consider it pure joy, verse 3, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, right?
Mm.
I think the idea is not just that to be happy, you're not happy about the situation.
Mm.
It's not joy in a loved one is sick. it's joy in this situation will bring me into a deeper faith with God, right? It's not joyful that what may happen as a result, right? It's not gonna be like when I first started doing archery. Um, there were times when I would drive home, I could not lift up my arm, right? Because I had just shot so much, my body wasn't ready for it, right. But now when I look at it, right, and like I'm able to like start winning competitions and things like that, right? I look back at it with joy that hey, I put in this work, right? Though it wasn't a pleasant experience when it happened, it brought me to like a better like proficiency with this skill. And I think that's what James 1 verses 2 to 4 talk about, right? We're not saying that we should be happy about bad things happening, but yet we're happy because we know that God is in control. And if we continue to trust Him through the situations, our faith will grow and our perseverance and our faithfulness in Him will grow. And I think that's one of the many things we can see in the life of Joseph, right? Um, last thing or last point, um, if you continue um, to read James 1, I think it's verse 13. It says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. Um, verse 14, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Um, I think a lot of times when we're going through situations, there is always some type of temptation to do something that I think is our version of a solution to the problem, right? I forgot what episode it was where you had brought up this idea of sometimes it's our own arrogance in response to God, where it's like, I just know better, right? And I think a lot of times that's the temptation. I know better than God. I think no matter what situation you find yourself in, when we give into temptation, we're really just saying, I know better than God in this situation, so I'm going to do my own thing, right?
I don't think that's applicable to every situation.
Okay. In most situations,
Because a lot of times people give into temptation because of a lack of strength to do otherwise. I do think that is applicable in certain situations, but to blanket it,
I think the temptation, the actual, I see what you're saying. My rebuttal to that would be I think the actual temptation is still that this is better than what God would do for us.
I disagree in certain
Okay.
cases because sometimes people give into the sensation, right? But also other times it's like it's not because it's better than what God can give me, but it's what I know.
I would, and for me, I would categorize that with it's
Okay.
me saying it's that, like, it's what I know. So instead of giving God the opportunity to do something, I'm going to go back to
Okay.
what I know is, or what I feel is better in that sense, right? And part of that also, I don't want to blanket that. I don't want to blanket that into like something that's become an addiction. So I think that blurs it. I think that first
Well, yeah, that's what
okay, so the first act of that first time you give into a temptation, then
Okay.
maybe that's a little clearer then. But with that, I think it's important to note that temptation tells us to think only about ourselves during our trials, right? God tells us rather to follow Him, think of others, and endure difficulty. God's purpose for us will always point us outward beyond ourselves to loving God and those around us, even in trials. Final thing to say.
You said that was your final thing.
Final question of the point I was making. What do you hope God will do in your life during your trials?
Um, during my trials, um,
Or what do you think God would produce in your life from those trials as you continue to trust in Him?
I think during my trials, I would hope that God helps me to navigate them, right? To show me what it is that I need to gain from them. Um, because I feel like a lot of times, if you don't learn something from your trial, you just keep experiencing it, right? So I would want to get it on the first try. As a result of my trials, I would hope that I have a testimony that can help someone else.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been that I would get closer to God,
Mhm.
right? Because I think a lot of what you kind of said, I think, stems from getting closer to
Yeah.
God. Um, but yeah, I think that's always just been my thing. And I think as I've gotten closer to God, I can see my response and reactions to trials have changed over time. And that's all I got for today.
Okay.
Bye.